Wait! Bingo. We did it, chat. Hey everyone, it's Sevy and welcome to my first impression of Flins using the CE server. The CE server, as a reminder, is early access content. It's the creator experience server that may still have some things subject to change, but I mean, the version is already out, so you can already see most of the content on its official servers, but keep in mind there may be some differences between the CE server and the official server. And just like the llama video, this is going to be a first look at Flins, what he does, how he works, plus some showcases, and my overall first impressions of trying him out and testing him out for several hours. This is not a comprehensive guide. This, again, is just going to give you a preview and some info on him to start with. So before we get into Flins' kit, I want to talk about some of the mechanics that they introduced into Krai that are going to be relevant to him. And you may already be familiar with some of these, especially since Krai has already been out for a couple of weeks at this point, but let's get into it anyway. So basics would be the team Moonsign, which is either nascent or ascendant. Nascent if you have one Krai character, ascendant if you have two or more Krai characters. Apparently, in Ascendant Gleam, or when your team has Ascendant Gleam, non-Krai characters actually give buffs to lunar reactions upon using their skill or burst. This is something that honestly you don't really have to pay attention to, but it's kind of just nice to take note of, especially when it comes to team building. It's important though to take note of the Ascendant Gleam characteristic, because for Flins, he really wants to be in a team with Ascendant Gleam, meaning you want at least one Krai character to pair with him at all times. Next, let's talk about the Lunarcharged reaction real quick. So when Flins is on the team, and actually this happens with Ineffa as well, for those who have her, you would know this, Electrocharged reactions are converted into Lunarcharged reactions. So when Lunarcharged happens, a thundercloud appears. It deals damage to enemies that are affected by Hydro and or Electro. And then the damage calculation of this Lunarcharged from the thundercloud considers the stats of every character involved in the reaction that applies Hydro or Electro. Again, this isn't something that you really need to concern yourself much about. I guess what's more important to take note of is that the stats EM and crit from your party are important. Now you can treat this basically as a separate damage source that makes you want to like keep applying Hydro and Electro to enemies. So you want like a good Hydro applicator, you want a good Electro applicator, so that the Thundercloud continuously deals damage. Now that being said, Flins does have parts of his kit, major parts of his kit actually, that deal his own damage that are considered Lunarcharged damage. They're going to be calculated separately from the Thundercloud's reaction damage. They're going to be based on his stats, they're going to be based on his talent multipliers and stuff. But essentially, buffs that say they apply to Lunarcharged or they buff Lunarcharged damage should then apply to both the Thundercloud damage and Flins' own Lunarcharged damage. And you'll see actually a lot of those buffs. You'll see them from his weapon, you'll see him from his artifact set, you'll see it from Ascendant Gleam and teammates and so on. So yeah, just covering those basic mechanics before we get into Flins' kit. Alright, let's start with Flins' animations. Okay, entering his skill, these are his normal attacks. This is his special skill. This is his special skill again. This is his special burst. Now that's not going to be the full damage of it because we weren't proccing Lunarcharged nearby. Now it's time to show you his full burst. Yeah! Alright, let's now talk about this tall man's kit and how he works. Honestly, we're going to ignore his normal attack talent because it's really not relevant to his core gameplay. So we're going straight to his skill. Flins' skill, when you press it, it makes him enter a special stance that gives him electro-infused normal attacks and also gives him interruption resistance. The multipliers for these electro-infused attacks are actually attached to his skill talent, not his normal attack talent. So if you want to strengthen these electro-infused attacks, you want to level up his skill talent. Now, when his normal attacks hit enemies in this state, he produces an electro particle at intervals. They have a cooldown as usual. And honestly, that's kind of the more important characteristic of this skill talent. It's not so much the damage, because as you'll see later, his burst is actually a much bigger contributor of his damage, but it's actually the energy generation that comes from it, which is also very important to Flins. Entering this state by pressing his skill makes his special skill available. It allows you to use his special skill if you press his skill again. So what is his special skill? Well, his special skill, it's essentially a flurry of spears. It deals AoE electro damage. It's flashy, it's cool, but it also has a 6-second cooldown, and more importantly, it makes his special burst available. Now, let's go on and look at his special burst, and this is gonna be a bit of a mouthful. Now, Flins' burst talent, it has a regular burst and a special burst, and we're gonna prioritize talking about his special burst because it's more important. So his special burst only costs 30 energy. It's available when his special skill is on cooldown. So you press his special skill, it has a cooldown of 6 seconds, and within those 6 seconds, you can use his special burst. Then this special burst, it deals damage that's considered Lunarcharged damage. So again, that means that buffs that apply to Lunarcharged damage will also apply to his damage from here. And again, there's a lot of buffs that actually do that. It also deals more damage when it's in Ascendant Gleam and there's a Thundercloud nearby, which means that you want teammates or you want your party to be proccing the Lunarcharged reaction regularly. And then, if we look at his normal burst, that one costs 80 energy, which is like a lot higher than his special burst's 30 energy, right? But other than that, it also deals Lunarcharged damage. I guess the question is like, when do you want to use his normal burst? Do you want to use it at all? You never see his very cool burst animation, or what? Like, what is it? From what I've tried out, this is actually gonna come down to his energy generation and his ER stat and such, but you want to prioritize using his special burst because you can use it more often, it deals a lot of damage, and you can use his normal burst when it's available, when you have enough energy, but you generally don't want to use it if using it prevents you from using his special burst, if that makes sense. It's like, prioritize his special burst, use normal burst when you can, but don't do it at the cost of his special burst. Now, there is going to be some flexibility because, again, like this special burst, it's actually available within a 6-second window whenever you use his special skill. There are going to be times when, oh, it turns out you do have enough energy in this rotation, or you've generated enough energy this time to actually use his normal burst, and then you'll be able to gather enough of that 30 energy to use his special burst within that 6-second window of using his special skill. I know that I'm using a lot of words right now, but it really boils down to, you'll probably be able to use his normal burst from time to time, but in every rotation, you want to prioritize using his special burst at least twice. So what does Flins' gameplay look like? And I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible because honestly, when you're playing him, it's all you need to know. So you swap Flins in, use his skill to enter his special stance, and then you can use his normal attacks to start getting energy particles. You can use his special skill, and then you can use his special burst if it's ready or when it's ready. And then keep using his normal attacks, wait for his skill to finish being on cooldown, use his special skill again, use his special burst again when it's ready, keep doing normal attacks in between to keep generating electro particles, and then you can swap out when you're done. Again, I want to emphasize that there is flexibility in what you can do once you are in his special stance. You don't have to use his special skill right away. You can start generating electro particles first. You don't have to use his special burst right after using his special skill, and so on. There is flexibility. You just want to get the hang of playing him and the timing of him so that you get his special burst twice in a rotation. Alright, let's move on to his passives, and honestly, they're pretty straightforward. This passive gives him additional 20% to Lunarcharged damage by Flins. This passive gives him extra EM based on his attack stat, up to 160 extra EM, and honestly, that's not going to be difficult for him to reach at all. And then he also converts Electrocharged into Lunarcharged, as we said earlier, but this is the passive that states it. And it also further buffs Lunarcharged damage based on his attack stat up to 14% more. These are all straightforward damage and stat increasing passives for Flins. So that being said, here are some extra info that could help you in building him, or things that you will want to consider when you build and team him up and play him and such. So let's go back to the energy recharge bit. In my opinion, the simplest way to build and play him is just to target using his special burst 2 times in each rotation. That gives him the lowest ER requirement. You don't need to think too much about trying to get his full burst up, but also trying to get his special burst ready in X amount of time. That being said though, there are going to be different ER thresholds, different rotations, and different scenarios that again let you use his full burst sometimes. Maybe every 3 rotations, maybe every 4, depending on where you're at or depending how much energy the enemy gives you when it dies, for example. There are options to go that route, and I'm not going to state like specific ER thresholds here because they really can vary according to the scenario. But if you do want to see his very cool full burst animation TM, where he turns into like a very blue, scary, but pretty eyes, be my guest. Honestly, that's base. Take note that his Lunarcharged damage from his burst is the biggest portion of his damage from his kit. So you want to focus resources on his burst talent level. You also want to take into account the stats that buff this, and those would be his attack stat. That would be, again, his talent level multiplier. And then the EM stat and his crit stat and things that buff Lunarcharged. Take note that unlike other Electro DPSs, damage percent is not among those, as in like damage percent like an Electro damage goblet, or damage percent as in from Farina or something. They are not among the things that buff Lunarcharged. So that's not a stat or a buff that you really want to build or prioritize among teammates. And then as for leveling his skill talent, I do think it's still worth leveling. It's not as high priority as his burst though, and then you want to leave his normal attack talent alone. You're really not going to use the multipliers there. So let's talk about his team building. When it comes to Flins' basic Lunarcharged team building, the idea, again, is to have Flins with a Hydro character so that you can proc Lunarcharged, an Electro character so that he gets Electro Resonance and that makes easier particle generation, and then the last slot can be a buffer or a defensive support, and then out of those 3 teammates, at least one of them has to be another Krai character so that you can achieve Ascendant Gleam. So a lot of you are probably aware that Ineffa is already a really great teammate for Flins. I mean, she's another Krai character. She already fulfills the Ascendant Gleam condition. She's an Electro character, immediately giving you Electro Resonance, and she's a defensive option. She gives you a shield. So all around, she's a great support for Flins if you did get her. But what if you didn't get her? Then that kind of makes your default Krai option or Krai teammate, I know. And that's alright, because at least she already fulfills the Hydro part of that equation. If you don't have an Ineffa, then you're going to want to look at your defensive options. So other options that are out there are Lanyan. I actually found Lanyan quite comfy. There's Cookie, there's Shilonen, there's also Bennett, and then there are the other animal healers like Sayu and Jean. Anyway, as for the teams that I did test out, I started with his Ineffa team. So basically I did Flins, Ineffa, and then grouped him with Yelan and Sucrose, and then this is with Flynn's R1 signature build. So this is the build for this showcase, and yeah, I mean, it went through Abyss quite smoothly. I really didn't expect anything else. Ineffa is a great teammate for him, and then we got Yelan for the Electrocharge, and Sucrose is great for sharing the EM. It was comfy, there was lots of Lunarcharge damage, and I really didn't have a problem with rotations or anything like that. But as I promised in my previous Flins video, because I personally don't have Ineffa, I wanted to try a lot of Ineffa-Less teams. And the 4-star teams that I tried, one of them was Flins, Aino, Auroron, and Sucrose. And the thing is, technically this team does not have a defensive option. So when I tried this team in Abyss, I actually gave Sucrose Prototype Amber to at least give a little team healing. And I also chose the Blessing that heals characters whenever they use their bursts, but you know, that's just one way to bypass it in Abyss. I can't say the same for Stygian Onslaught. But actually, the comfier option is if you use Lanyan, because she's a shielder. As an animal character, she can use the Viridescent Venerer set to shred enemy resistance. And when I tested her out in the Flins team, I actually liked her quite a lot. Other defensive options that I tried instead of Lanyan were actually Shilonen and Bennett. And no, they're not animal characters, but they do have means of shredding enemy resistance and or buffing your team. And healing. Honestly, I didn't have any issues with those teammates either. So I basically did find like some good options if you don't have Ineffa, as long as you have Ino. Flynn's team building, it has like some variety at least. I think the more interesting thing that I spent more time on actually, aside from testing out his 4-star teammates, was testing out Favonius Lance on him. I know that Favonius Lance isn't really like a team-focused characteristic per se, but I did try a few different teams with Flins, and so far, like damage-wise, he still didn't struggle in Abyss, but of course, again, take with a grain of salt because Abyss conditions do like to favor the new characters, Flins included. When it came to the Favonius build, I did edit his build a bit to use a crit rate circlet and so that his ER landed closer to 140% because I ended up liking the Favonius gameplay because it let me use his normal burst more often and more easily and more smoothly without always being in fear of running out of energy for his special burst. And you know, using his normal burst means you get that really cool animation which like tickled my bones. So I really enjoyed it. And his damage in Abyss was still quite consistent. I wasn't struggling with time. So honestly, it's a very valid option using Favonius Lance if you don't want to make the Krai craftable, or if you want an alternative to it, or, you know, because you might have an R5 Favonius Lance, but you don't yet have an R5 Krai craftable, for example. And then of course I used him with the Krai craftable. This was an R5 Krai craftable because that's what's available in the CE server. And I just smoothened out his ER with the team so that I could comfortably do 2 special bursts in a rotation. I didn't try anymore to get his normal burst up. He still performed well as expected. He wasn't struggling. I can't say the same for Stygian 5 because I didn't get to test that. And for his teammates in these, I was sticking to 4 stars. Again, I was sticking to Ineffa-Less teams. And then the last thing, which is honestly a little bit of a complex thing, I tried Flins in Quickbloom teams. The idea of this would be Flins plus Dendro plus Hydro, and then the 4th teammate, you'd still want to be an Electro unit for the Electro Resonance still. And I was curious about including a Dendro unit in his team because since Flins can actually stack up a bunch of EM, especially from buffs, I was thinking he'd probably be able to do some sizable Hyperblooms. If he's not making sizable Hyperblooms, that extra Electro teammate can actually be Cookie, who is usually built for Hyperblooms, you know? So the main concern with Quickbloom teams is trying to keep up the Hydro and Electro aura on enemies so that the Thundercloud keeps hitting them, because that's the main condition for the Thundercloud to deal Lunarcharged damage to these enemies. Now, the issue with inserting a Dendro character in there is that the Dendro aura can actually interfere with the Hydro and Electro aura, such that you would end up getting Quicken aura, which is Dendro plus Electro, more often. I basically tried several Quickbloom setups with different teammates to see how the auras would interfere with each other. I tried Lauma for anyone crazy enough to get both her and Flins. And some perks here is that, well, she's very strong in Bloom Plus teams. She can buff the Hyper Blooms that are produced, she has some personal damage as well, and her Dendro application isn't as strong as Nahida's, meaning it won't interfere as much, ideally, with the Hydro and Electro auras on the enemies. As I did try it out with very fast Hydro from a C6 Xingqiu, you can still get that Hydro Electro aura on enemies from time to time, and let the Thundercloud hit them instead of only getting Quickens. Aside from that, she is a Krai character, so she automatically helps the team attain Ascendant Gleam. It did take a C6 Xingqiu for me to like comfortably wipe out the Quicken aura and actually get the Hydro Electro aura. Like, I tried a bunch of Dendro Hydro combos out. I tried Baiju and Ino. I even tried Emily Ino, Dendro MC and Ino, and in all scenarios, like, Ino did have a hard time removing the Quicken aura, which means that if you do want to play Flins in a Quickbloom team, Ino is much less effective, and you would need another Krai character to help you enable that Ascendant Gleam. I did find like pretty good results in my runs using Flins, Ineffa, Xingqiu, and Dendro MC. That's just the Dendro character I thought of using because it's someone that everyone has. Honestly, I think the Quickbloom comps would need more testing to really evaluate its effectiveness, but when it comes to his basic Lunarcharged team compositions, I think they're fairly straightforward and intuitive to at least put together, and they were they were pretty easy to play, and Flins was doing his damage. He was doing his thing. Okay, time for a quick rundown of his constellations for those who are maybe looking at getting some constellations for their very nice, very goth gentleman. C1, it reduces Flins' special skill cooldown to 4 seconds. And this actually means that he will be able to use his special skill and his special burst 3 times in a rotation. You might be thinking, well, okay, that demands more energy, and this constellation helps a little bit with that. It lets him recover 8 energy every 5.5 seconds whenever a party member triggers Lunarcharged. There is still a possibility that you would have to alter your ER stat a little bit just to accommodate this, or just to make rotations a little smoother, so you'll want to test that out and adjust accordingly, but generally it's a pretty big damage increase. His C2 gives him more damage when he uses his normal attacks in his special stance, but also when the team is in Ascendant Gleam and his electro attacks hit opponents, those electro attacks decrease those opponents' electro resistance by 25%. That's honestly quite significant. And this also makes your Lunarcharged damage hit harder. So it's another strong early constellation. And then C3 increases his burst level by 3. And honestly, that's a pretty good stopping point unless you want to go all the way to C6. So past that, C4, it increases his attack stat and attack to EM stat conversion, basically more stats. C5 increases his skill level by 3, and then C6, it buffs his Lunarcharged damage further via a separate multiplier that they're referring to as elevated. So I don't know, I guess that's going to show up in future vocabulary or future constellations and such, but elevated is apparently a different multiplier now. And then on Ascendant Gleam, C6 does the same for his teammates, but to a lesser degree. So that's his constellations. I've seen a lot of my chat saying that they're also going to try for C1, asking if I'm going to try for C1. Again, it really comes down to my pull luck, but it's good to note for those who like to spend a little bit that his early constellations are quite strong. So lastly, let's talk about my impressions of Flins after testing him on the CE server. One thing I have to point out actually is that he makes the camera move so much, because when he does a special burst, he hops up into his lamp and then he goes down, which visually is cool. But then I'm like, why is my camera at this angle? Like it goes at an angle where the thundercloud actually gets in the way. And if you are not at that angle, if you're at the normal angle that Genshin sets you at for characters, the thundercloud is like hovering high enough that it actually doesn't really obscure your field of vision. But when the camera keeps going at kind of a bird's eye angle, because Flins keeps hopping up when he does his special burst, sometimes it gets a bit weird, because I'm like, now I see the thundercloud. If you get motion sickness, unfortunately that's one thing you might have to be wary of. Just be wary that your vision might be obscured at some points because of the presence of thundercloud and that sudden bird's eye view camera. But that aside, just keep in mind that he is a Lunarcharged DPS, primarily a Lunarcharged DPS, and so because it's a new thing, it's a new Nodcry mechanic, a lot of content in the Nodcry era is going to favor him. So I think that they are going to make him a good, strong DPS for the meantime. And yeah, I was very pleased by his damage and his performance in Abyss, but I do wish I got to test him out in Stygian Onslaught just to see how he does in level 5. I personally find his gameplay fun. I find it engaging because like there's a certain tempo to it and a certain thrill to like needing to time his skill and make sure you have enough energy to proc his special burst. And if you're on Fav, then getting his normal burst up as well. I like the attention that you have to pay to it and then the rhythm that comes with it. I think it's interesting without being like overly complicated, plus the flexibility in the timing of his skill and burst I think also just makes it a bit easier, but also quite fun. Like it's not as strict, but it's fun. Hopefully he continues to get more good teammates out of the Nodcry cast. I don't like the idea of him being super reliant on Ineffa or Ino just to have Ascendant Gleam on. But, you know, as Nodcry keeps releasing characters, hopefully fulfilling that Ascendant Gleam requirement becomes easier and easier. Even then, at this point, like, he does have an okay variety of 4 stars among the older characters, as long as you have the Ascendant Gleam quality fulfilled. For those who want to love him a little bit more than C0, at least his early constellations are quite strong. And lastly, He's very tall, surprisingly. And he's hot, unsurprisingly. And he's very gentle, surprisingly. But aside from that, like, obviously, I really like him as a character. If you've been paying attention to my content on my streams, I'm really excited for him to be here. Anyway, that's going to be all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, don't forget to leave a like. Leave a comment down below what you think of Flins, if you're pulling him, how you plan on building him, or who you end up comping him with. And subscribe to my channel for more. I will see you soon. Take care.